When the history is written, January 2018 will go down as the toughest month in Steve Bannon's political and public life. Dissed by the president he helped elect, roasted by his former proteges like Stephen Miller, ousted from his passion project Breitbart News, and roundly hoisted on the very petard he used against so many foes, leaking to the so-called mainstream media. All that was before tonight's news. Moments ago, the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee telling reporters, boom, he's issuing a subpoena to Steve Bannon to legally force him to talk. Bannon had arrived at the committee early this morning. You're looking at him going through security like any other civilian. Sources telling NBC News that Bannon said that he did want to answer the questions. He said that the White House, with which he's in a very public spat, told him he couldn't answer the questions. Now, let's be clear right off the bat. Many other people linked to this White House, including former employees, have spoken to that committee. Trump's personal lawyer spent 6 hours talking to them. But the breaking news here tonight is that for whatever reason, and it could be a legitimate one, Steve Bannon claims he could not. And then think about this. Whenever you hear this criticism that Democrats are overplaying their hand on Russia or getting new information to get to the bottom of this, the heat coming down on Steve Bannon right now, when I was walking out to the set, this breaking story, this subpoena on the House side comes from Republicans. And that's not all. This is the second Bannon subpoena that's been leaking out just today. The New York Times, late today, breaking the story that Mueller is subpoenaing Bannon as well, a hardball tactic that is legally more assertive than his approach to many other witnesses who've been allowed to come in voluntarily. Why now? Could Mueller think that all of Bannon's leaks in that tell-all White House book Fire and Fury is something to dig into? Maybe. Will these subpoenas force him to talk? The White House, for its part, not saying.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Time to exit.
What about Steve Bannon talking to the special counsel, sir?
Everyone, please exit. Thank you.
Why not encourage Steve Bannon to be completely transparent today on Capitol Hill to help?
No one's encouraged him to be anything but transparent, but there is a process of what that looks like and what that process should go through.
And that not answering some questions, right?
Look, I can't speak to that.
In a moment, I will speak to Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen about all of this and how Steve Bannon's excuses line up with the facts. But I begin with an analysis from David Frum, a speechwriter for President George W. Bush. He is the author of a new book, Trumpocracy, as well as Nick Ackerman, a Watergate special prosecutor and a partner at Dorsey and Whitney. Nick, these aren't coordinated, and they don't have to be. But Steve Bannon caught 2 subpoenas today, which is way more aggressive than most other witnesses. Do you have a theory as to why?
I think it's bad luck. I think he was ultimately going to be a witness in this case regardless. He has knowledge relating to the data mining and the data targeting of Hillary Clinton voters. He's the one that put the entire group together in May of 2016 to introduce the campaign to this whole data mining program.
But let me press you on the new part. Why is Steve Bannon making a claim to these House investigators that other Trump allies have not? That he seems to think there's some reason he can't talk?
Well, it depends what the reason is. If he's asserting his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination, that's certainly legitimate.
The leaks don't sound like that. The leaks sound like he is claiming the White House is pushing him away from talking.
Then that means somebody is telling him that he may have to assert executive privilege. But he can only do that for the period of time from January 20th of 2016 to the present. He can't do it for the time period during the campaign. And I'm sure that there is plenty of information to ask him about during the time of the campaign.
David, I want your analysis, and also I want to add to this rather large buffet of new information, the New York Times analysis of why grand jury interviews are different. This isn't something most people are very familiar with. Prosecutors prefer to interview witnesses before a grand jury when they believe they have information the witnesses do not know, or when they think they might catch the witnesses in a lie. We know that Bob Mueller has caught people in lies with the standard FBI interview. Clearly, there is a reason that he is using this hardball tactic tonight.
Look, when you, in a book to a confidant, in discussions with a confidant who writes a book, accuse the son of the President of the United States of treason, that catches people's attention. As to your claims, as to your points about what kind of privilege would he be asserting, remember the Trump people have periodically asserted various kinds of non-existent privileges. The quality of lawyering they get is not always of the highest, nor is it always true that they do what their lawyers tell them. But for me, the key moment that is interesting about Bannon's career in this investigation are those moments in the fall of 2016, at the time that the Access Hollywood audio was broken by the Washington Times, instantly followed by the WikiLeaks John Podesta dump. The Trump people weaponized that John Podesta dump.
Well timed from a political perspective.
Within 45 minutes. But what is even more striking is this campaign that was so chaotic, so disorganized, found in that trove of emails the two that could be weaponized, and they found them within hours. And given their general disorganization, you have to wonder, are they quite sure they had no idea what was coming?
I mean, you raise a very important question that is a potentially damaging question for the campaign if there is other contemporaneous evidence, which would be emails, records, recordings, or even, as Nick has pointed out on our show, micro-targeting or other digital data that would suggest, oh, this email was flagged by someone and they knew it was coming. Is that enough, though, in Mueller's view, to put Bannon under exposure? Because Bannon's a very good leaker, I will say, and by that I mean he leaks constantly and to his own interest. And there have been many stories written by credible outlets carrying his narrative that he was the one warning against all the bad stuff and never implicated.
Well, that's what he's leaking. But there was apparently a conspiracy to steal the emails from the Democratic National Committee and use those emails and weaponize them to help Trump win election. That is a crime. It's a 10, 15-year felony. Now, what Bannon's involvement might have been in that, we don't know. We know he introduced Cambridge Analytica to the campaign. We don't know what role they played. We don't know what he knew about the WikiLeaks. I mean, he was on the email chain from Don Jr., understanding that Don Jr. was communicating.
You mean Don Jr., the egg, the human egg?
The human egg, right.
The human egg. Well, David, this goes to the politics of it. I want to play for you Steve Bannon's attempt to say what it would be like this month. He wanted 4 months, and certainly going into the midterms, to be the big tough guy going to war, ostensibly against Trump's enemies, but maybe sometimes pressing Trump. It hasn't worked out well for him, but this was the plan.
They do not support the president's program. It's an open secret on Capitol Hill. Everybody in the city knows it.
And so, therefore, now that you're out of the White House, you go into war with them.
Absolutely.
Going to war with them. It's not working out well because he lost his website and his relationships with the White House. In your view, as a Washington knowledgeable veteran, do his political relationships and spats right now matter, or they don't ultimately cloud what he's going to say?
Look, people who can actually do the things that Steve Bannon was talking about doing do not sit down with Charlie Rose and talk about them. They just do them. And so there's a lot of myth about Steve Bannon and if you look at the expression on his face and the color of his eyes in that interview, I mean, I think that gives you some insight into what's going on with this very, very loud talk of threats.
What do you mean?
He's not a man fully in control of himself. He says things he shouldn't say. And
you're saying he seems emotional and angry rather than acting from strategy.
Exactly.
Understood.
But here's the thing to bear in mind as they go into that room, just to pick up what Nick said. People need to be very careful about leaping to the conclusion that the most dramatic and important things that happen are going to be criminal. Yes, it's a crime to hack emails, but the people who did that are Russian citizens, presumably, and presumably beyond the reach of American law. It may be a crime to give, it is certainly a crime to give a thing of value to an American presidential campaign, although information is not usually considered a thing of value under election law. But if you have not broken the eavesdropping laws, the hacking laws, if you have not broken election law, simply the most horrifying aspect of this, the horrifying, immoral, anti-democratic act of talking to an informant intelligence service and getting information to use against your American Democratic opponent, that's not a crime.
Well, that is a big hanging question over all of this, and why Steve Bannon tonight, facing 2 subpoenas, has suddenly clammed up. I would note, I'm obligated as a reporter to note, he's generally known to be quite talkative. So this is a different look for him. I want to thank both of our analysts here in turn. As promised, we'll get David back in later in the show, but I want to turn to the other issue. Mueller questioning witnesses to find out what happened, and one fact not up for debate. There is the hacking, and it's criminal, and a top Trump official confirming that today.
I believe that Russia in general will continue to try to test our systems, and where they can extract information and perhaps disrupt, they will. Yes, there was interference. To my knowledge, no votes were changed.
Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen joins me. He also wrote a piece today with Republican Marco Rubio about a bill they're pushing to defend the U.S. against future hacks. And Senator, I want to give you time to speak to that, which is an important policy issue. But I begin with the breaking news story tonight. Steve Bannon catches 2 subpoenas leaking out here on the same day and makes the argument that he may have a legitimate reason not to talk to Congress because of the White House. Do you accept that?
I do not accept that, and certainly I don't accept it with respect to any questions related to the campaign. Of course, the meeting of Trump Tower, which he has infamously referred to as being treasonous on the part of Donald Trump Jr. And Jared Kushner. With respect to his duties and what he learned at the White House, it would be a very far reach for the White House to assert executive privilege, and in order for Bannon to even attempt that, the committee should really push to get a strong White House statement confirming that that's their position, because he should not be allowed simply at this point in time to decide he's not going to offer the information that he knows to Congress or ultimately before the grand jury.
I'm not going to ask you to comment on what's going on inside the Mueller probe, but as a broader matter, which you have a lot of experience on, what does it mean when an investigator subpoenas someone for grand jury testimony, which, as I've emphasized, is more significant than simply scheduling a voluntary interview?
It is indeed, and it is a departure from the practice that Mueller's been following with respect to other potential witnesses, as you indicated. It suggests that Mueller has something that he wants to present in that particular forum, rather than the other kind of setup where someone comes in voluntarily. So that may explain why Steve Bannon is all of a sudden, trying to go underground and refuse to answer any questions or come up with pretexts not to answer any questions. I don't think he's going to get away with that with Mueller, and I certainly hope he doesn't get away with it before congressional committees.
Well, Senator, you just said it's a way to present to the grand jury, and 2 main reasons to do that would be, 1, significant enough testimony or evidence about other people or actions that Mueller actually at this stage wants the grand jury to hear themselves, or 2, some sort of confrontation about Steve Bannon's own testimony or veracity. Do you have any view of whether it's either of those or some other, door number 3?
Ari, I really don't. I mean, I would be speculating entirely with respect to the grand jury proceeding.
We don't, Senator, we never ask people to speculate in the media. That's just not who we are. Let me get to your bill, sir, which also is very significant. And as we note, bipartisan. There is a rumor sometimes that nothing is happening there in the chamber where you work on a bipartisan basis. It caught our eye here on the Beat. Let me read a quote and have you explain why you think this is important. If Russia interferes in another election, the bill sets severe sanctions on major sectors of the Russian economy, blocks the assets of every senior Russian political figure or oligarch, prevent them from entering the U.S. How would that work as an automatic trigger? And why is this bill necessary if there have been some sanctions already?
Well, as we've been talking about, there's been lots of focus on what happened in the last election. No doubt that Russians interfered, but very little attention as to how we're going to stop this from happening going forward. And you just heard the testimony in the committee today from the Secretary of Homeland Security saying that we believe that the Russians will try once again. So we should do everything in our power to deter that, to prevent that, and that's why Senator Rubio and I introduced this bill. What it says is 30 days after the election, the Director of National Intelligence will certify to Congress whether or not Russia or another country interfered in our election. And if the answer is yes, then this bill requires automatic, harsh sanctions against large sectors of the Russian economy. So if you're Vladimir Putin and you're thinking about the costs and benefits of trying to interfere in another U.S. election, you're going to see a law that requires automatically action to be taken that will hurt your economy badly. And so we believe that would be a deterrent.